My name's Paul Gassner, born and raised in Danbury, still live here. I was a sergeant in the United States Army Chemical Corps. I was with the 1st Air Cavalry Division in Vietnam, stationed about 100 miles north of Saigon and just east of the Central Highlands. I grew up, well, it was the country back then. My family had a restaurant, so I was, working there. Weekends, Friday nights, Sundays, was working in the restaurant, so it was very little free time. I enjoyed growing up in the country. I had a horse. I enjoyed the heck out of them. And it was a carefree lifestyle. Going to basic, you're limited to just the basic necessities, toiletries, that kind of stuff. You left your civilian clothes behind and shipped them home, and you were supplied with Army uniforms. It was definitely a different world. You learned responsibility. Mommy wasn't there to bail you out. And you learned to stand on your own 2 feet and be responsible for your life. I went for the Chemical Corps because that was my best subject in high school and my major in college. Unfortunately, my military specialty at the time was filled in my company, so I was carried at excess. So a couple weeks later, a levy came down for all excess personnel to report to Vietnam. The trip to Vietnam was very interesting. It had to be one of the most quietest airplane flights ever, because everyone was really focused, am I coming home again? I landed in Karin Bay, and of course, you get to the door to unload, and two things hit you. One was the heat, and the other was the smell, the ever-present smell of jungle rot. And I'm walking down the stairs, and there's a line of about 200 soldiers getting ready to get on the plane to come home. So now you're talking 18, 19, 20-year-olds in the prime of their life. And I looked at them, and as God is my witness, it looks like the lifeblood had been sucked out of them. 1 year in Vietnam is like they were chewed up and spit out. And I'm thinking, God help me, because this is what I'm going to look like in another year. About 2 hours later, the lights went out, the sirens went on, and what the heck? And I underwent my first rocket attack. Most of the scouting for the 1st Air Cav fell on my platoon. So we used the sniffer a lot, and we're out in front of the troops, looking for the bad guys. And then when we found them, or we knew the bad guys were coming, that's when we set the bomber up, and we went to stop them, slow them down, and make them take a different route, to protect our troops from an attack coming in one way. So yeah, it was hazardous. This is the inside of a Chinook helicopter. We had turned it into a bomber. The unhappy fellow on the right was the motor pool sergeant. He got drafted into flying that day because we were short-handed. Shortly after I left, the bomber took a direct hit from a anti-aircraft gun. Anyway, it was lucky the shell didn't arm. It went right through the fuselage with the guys inside of it. Yeah, they would have all been killed if it did explode. We were coming back from Quan Loy one time. We had emptied out and were flying back to base. And so we're enjoying the view, sitting on the back deck of the Chinook, watching the scenery, and all of a sudden you see all these bubbles forming. And the bubbles are the concussion. A B-52 had started dropping its bombs, and we had literally flown underneath the bombs. And there's this whole row of bubbles behind us. And this is, ooh, that was a little close. When you got mail, you kind of look forward to it, especially if your girlfriend was writing you at the time. She usually put perfume on it, so it was nice to, yeah. The worst thing, I think, was doing guard duty in the monsoon. At 2 in the morning, in the middle of monsoon, you could not see the end of your nose. And every now and then you'd have a lightning flash. And then for that split second, you could see if anything was moving. I processed out in San Francisco, and to get military tickets, you had to be in uniform. While I was at the airport, I've had people come up and yell at me. You came home, your family knew you were in Vietnam, but you're so rejected and ostracized, you didn't tell anyone. It was a whole different world. My mother had died when I was in the service, when I was 19. I hadn't seen her for the better part of a year when I got the news. She died from an automobile accident, and I was living with my grandparents at the time, and it just is like putting on a different planet. I mean, you knew everything. It was your same hometown and stuff, but everything was just totally, it was like night and day. You kind of remember the good things, you kind of phase out the bad times. A lot of sleepless nights, you know. The nicest thing I found was the internet. I've connected with some friends I haven't heard from in 40 years. I spent like the last 10 months of my service in Vietnam. We flew out of Tan Son Air Base in Saigon, and it's funny because the bus had heavy metal screens on it, so hand grenades weren't thrown in. And anyway, it was taken off, it was very quiet, but once we flew over the coast, over the South China Seas, all hell broke loose on the plane because we knew we were on the way home. Yeah.
In a country where they turn back time, you go strolling through the crowd like Peter Lorre contemplating a crime. She comes out of the sun in a silk dress, running like a watercolor in the rain. Don't bother asking for explanation, she'll just tell you that she came